Hey, can I ask Jim a question real quick?
Yeah.
Based off that, Antonio Brown, the Oakland Raiders are on Hard Knocks. It's the much heralded NFL series. I know Rod's a big fan of that. Should the CFL, TSN, their television partner, look into doing something like that, maybe to help create a little more buzz? Because through the preseason, there's not a ton, but they've started televising. The odd game. Is that something that you think would be something that the league could look into? Because I know you spent hours and hours in league meetings over your career.
I think it'd be a great idea. I mean, you look at Rod been at many training camps, and the things that happen at training camp, the fun things and so on. And fans love that behind the scenes look.
100% agree.
I used to just love it when we would bring fans into the locker room, and they were just in awe. So that kind of thing, I think, would be a good way to expose more people to the game and get people turned on to being lifetime fans.
Talk about Antonio Brown, and if you follow any of what with the Raiders, like John Gruden's just like, why did we get this guy? Who was the most flamboyant guy in your time, your decade of decadence?
Oh, that's a good question. Who was the most flamboyant?
Hard to handle, maybe.
The guy I loved, but he was out there, was Dwight Anderson. And I remember when Dwight was with Calgary, I just hated him, And I'd stand on the sideline, and he'd chirp, and I'd chirp, and then he came here, and the guy was awesome. He was great in the locker room. He was a good family guy. The players loved him, but put him on the field, and he turned it on. Yeah, he lost it. But there were lots of guys that were characters, and you look back and you think. We talked about him the other day, Frank Landy. I mean, Frank was a defensive lineman. They had the big personality, and those guys kind of stick out.
Well, I noticed this about D.I. I didn't like him either. If you remember, he poked Dressler in the eye in a game in Montreal, and we had to take him to the hospital that night. And I remember when the Riders signed D.A., we had him on the radio, and I said, "Are you going to apologize to Weston Dressler?" And he said, "For what?" He didn't remember. But he gets here. He knew every security guard in Usher's name. He knew all the staff. He cared.
He did.
So that's the kind of guy that you don't see outside the sidelines.
He was like Roy Shivers in that regard. Roy had the big personality and he had a persona, but Roy knew everybody. Roy always asked about how the family was. He cared. That's what it comes down to.
Couple more comments. Trent chiming in from Norway today. Hello, Trent. He says, Jim has hit the nail on the head with tickets and PR. Relationships with the fan base is important. Thank you, Trent, for checking in from Norway. Mucho gracias. What do you got doing? Is that you, Paul? Who's got their phone going over there? It's not a movie up here. Quiet on the set. So over to Winnipeg, and good morning, Winnipeg. The Bombers announcing the Walby burger. You want to show it up? Clark's got a picture of it here. I don't know exactly what is involved with it. There it is on the left, guys. There. That is the Walby burger that they're now going to be selling at IG Field and ambulance rides for free. Afterwards.
The poor St. John's people.
Yeah, Luke Mullender saying on Twitter this morning, typical Bombers. Looks amazing at the start. Probably can't finish it, though.
Ouch.
Oh.
Ouch. Funny because it's
You got
true.
a Walby story, Jim, you said.
Well, just, I'm a pretty big guy, bigger than I should be, but I remember sitting one time between Chris Walby and Miles Corral, and I really felt like a little kindergarten kid. I was looking up at one guy, and then they're just huge, and both big personalities, funny, really love to poke fun at themselves, and they do love their food, and they might enjoy an occasional beer as well.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, well, I had the same experience sitting between Aldag and Poley. It makes you feel small. It's not a bad feeling. It's just because I'm 6'3.5". Same thing. There's a couple Rider legends there. Our director of scouting writing in, Craig Smith, today. If TSN can have a director of scouting,
yes,
Craig
I
Button,
agree.
so can we. It's Smitty. He says, was in the CFL for 19 years, came across nobody better than Jim. Easy to see why the Riders had so much success with him at the top. Well, Smitty, your time on the CFL is not over, as we all know. As a matter of fact, the last time you were in here, Jim, you said, why is he not working?
That's right.
Well, he'll tell you it's because of his leukemia battle and his stem cell implants, or what do you? I'm not familiar with it, thankfully. Smitty will be back. He's a good football man.
two guys that the CFL needs right now are Craig Smith and Brendan Tannen.
I knew that was
and they're
gonna
not
be second.
the big flamboyant guys and so on. They just do their job under the radar, no egos, love the game, know the game, and I'm pulling for Smitty. He's a great guy, and I want to see him back, and I want to see Brendan back in some capacity as well.
Well, they've got the backing. They've got the resumes. The one thing with Brendan, because I've talked to him a little bit here over the last 6-7 months, and certainly his brother Barry, he's in a position where he can afford to be choosy. He's not going to take just any job.
No, he's not. And I talked to him mostly by email and text and so on. Yeah, and he's happy, and he likes doing his little gig with the Leader Post and Van Stone, and I think that's great. And he's had some opportunities. It's not like people haven't reached out to him, but it hasn't been the right situation for him. And so hopefully he'll get back at some point.
Yeah, he has for certain had opportunities. Randy writing in this morning says, enjoying the show here in Red Deer, Alberta. So we always enjoy with where you're chiming in from every morning here on the Rod Pedersen Show. And don't forget, you can text us on the Prairie Mobile text line, 306-840-8777. Looks like people already have. I'll get to that in a minute. For Prairie Mobile, 840-8777. Brian's watching from Vancouver this morning. He is with the BC Lions Den podcast. I think we're all watching the BC Lions with considerable interest for different reasons. Mine's Duran, not to mention the Lions they've literally bent over backwards to accommodate this show, putting on their players and staff. So Brian writes in and he says, what would Jim do if he had a chance to run the BC Lions to get fans back in the seats? And does he think an ownership change is needed in BC? And after you answer that, I'll talk about the latest article in the Vancouver
Very
Province, if you saw it, by Ed Willis.
Very interesting.
An ownership consortium. Sounds like they're putting their money together to buy the BC Lions. We'll talk about that. But Jim, if you went in to run the Lions, what would you do? I
wouldn't do a lot different than the man that's there right now. They've got Rick Wallisher. Rick's a good friend. Rick and his wife were at the Hall of Fame on Friday night and Saturday. He ran the Edmonton Eskimos for 8 years. He understands the challenges. So they got the right guy there. And a change is coming. David Bailey has said that he wants to get out. He's at that point in his life, and so I think it is important to bring in that new energy. David has been unbelievable for the league, what he's done in BC and Toronto and Hamilton. But it's time to bring somebody in. When I watched the game on Saturday night, they've got some good players. They're not far away. But they're a young team, and you could see sometimes their emotion and the excitement got a little out of control on this, between the coaches, the players. And if they could, when they settle down and learn to win, they should have 3 wins by now, really. But they've blown a couple games. But the opportunity to win is there for them. Rick has a lot of confidence in Ed Hervey. I don't see a change coming there at all. They're gonna ride this out and hopefully get it right. And Riley, I thought Riley looked more like Riley on Saturday night. He seemed to be, the old guy that would run when he needed to and so on. They had, 150 yards rushing, so they certainly were doing some things well. But I think that franchise can still be very successful. I'm concerned though about the East, as many are. But if Toronto has a sellout, fantastic. My son said, or somebody said when we were down there, in a city that big, we only need like 1/10% of the population to show
fill
up
a stadium
on game day because there's so many million people down there, and so they got to keep working at it. Montreal seems like they're turning the corner, and so that's positive. But I want to see some sellouts here before we get deep into the fall.
Well, I know you're just one second.
Yeah.
Well, great comments are coming in today, and one is about, as you talk, more things are going through my head and theirs. Montreal's engaged. Their fans are engaged. You know how we know? They're furious at what happened Friday night at Molson McGill Stadium. And I actually went into the book Green Magic about the rain out here in 2007 to get the details. It was early fourth quarter. Edmonton was leading 32-30. Andre Proulx, who apparently is a good friend of yours.
Good guy.
Which we'll tell that story in a minute.
The fans won't like to hear that, but he's a good man.
Lightning struck at Ipsco. You may remember all these details, but I don't really remember. Lightning struck at Ipsco, and Andre, somebody got a message to him, and he said, we're going off the field. Stopping the game. So they went under the stands. Then the power went out. So whoever wrote in earlier this week and said it was storm first, then the power outage, you had that right. So, and of course the Riders stormed back and win. Well, Alouettes fans think they would have stormed back and won on Friday night. So how do you feel about this whole thing?
Well, I was caught off guard, and I think that was part of the problem. So many people were. I think TSN was caught off guard. People weren't brought up to speed in terms of the new rule, the change, and so I think that was part of it. That nobody knew this was coming. I remember that 07, so clearly because we were losing when we went in, and we sat in the locker room in the dark, literally, and there was some emergency lights, and you know what it was like in the old dressing room with the cement and the leaks,
it was
the
dark in there
water's
to begin
dripping.
with.
We got pails, the guys are waiting and waiting. And finally, Andre came in, and I went out and talked to him, and we had a talk, and he said, "You guys want to go?" And I went in the locker room. I said to J.O., Jeremy O'Day, who was the captain, I said, "What do you think, J.O.?" And he says, "Heck yeah, we're going to play." And we went out, and we came storming back and won the game. And I was surprised at how many people stayed. We expected to see empty stands after that long delay, but they were there. And but I'm not opposed to the change. But I think we need to tweak it. At some point, you got to look at the safety of the players, the safety of the fans. Is it reasonable to expect people to wait 4-5 hours? I don't know what the number is, but I think they'll work through that. But it needs to be better communicated within the fan base, within the league. I think the Riders and the Alouettes were caught off guard by it.
Yeah, well, it would be nice if they would tell people when they go and change or put in new rules.
But the thing was, A, it was collectively bargained.
Yep.
And B, it was the rule. And C, no way in hell Montreal was coming back in that game. They only had 90 yards through basically 3 full quarters of offense. There was no chance. The Riders' offense, I can get where they're at, and if this had been the roles reversed, and the Rider fans would be upset too, and I get it. But, no way. No way Montreal was coming back in that one. But I do agree with you. An hour does seem a little quick. Where that line falls, I don't know. That becomes, like you said, a player safety issue. You can only start and stop so many times, and then that would be an issue.
I think they had the right idea, and you made a great point. The players wanted this.
Yeah, it was bargained.
It was bargained for, and so, I heard comments from some of the players, and some of them were there negotiating. So, we got to work through it. A win is a win. We'll take it right now, and but it does feel a little tainted. But at the end of the day, you win some games you shouldn't, and you lose some games you shouldn't, and that's sport, and that's the way it is.
The one thing I wanted to ask you, Jim, was, and we were talking about some of the people have some concerns. BC, we saw the question, or in Toronto. When you first came to the Riders as the CEO, what were kind of some of the things you identified? And I know it kind of ended up being the perfect storm with, you winning a Grey Cup a year later and all that momentum kind of really snowballed. But was there a couple things that you identified, especially when it came to increasing, the gate, that you said, we got to do this better?
Well, we knew we had to do our game day better. We didn't have the money, we didn't have the resources, so it was pretty much a vanilla game day in terms of what we presented. And we had an older fan base. It was obvious when you walked around. A lot of guys sitting, listening to Rod on their transistor radios. And we didn't have a video board. We were the only team in the league without one. So we knew we had to get a video board. We had to start adding some excitement, replays, and so on. We needed to add some pizzazz to the game. We need to see some young families, young fans. So that was pretty obvious and changed that demographic. That's when I talked about Huey McKay, and he was a big part of that. But it was funny. Huey was funny because I remember saying to him, Huey, we need an inflatable football or helmet or something to run our players out. We got to do that. Oh, we can't do that. I said, that was Huey.
Cost.
I said, well, he said, we don't have where are we going to put it and how are we going to do it? But Huey's really a smart guy. And then, next day he comes to me, I've been thinking about that. We can do it. He said, and so, but there were such obvious changes, like an inflatable helmet, the drum line, all those things. But those were the things that you brought in to add some excitement, add some pizzazz. We needed better concessions. We needed better everything. That was just our reality. But our fans were so loyal, and they didn't complain. They weren't. The fans weren't really complaining. They were, and that was part of it too. Was changing this mindset from, hey, we're happy we got the Riders, to, hey, we want to win some games here. We want to win a Grey Cup. So those were the obvious ones, and it was getting the the people resources to make these things happen. And of course, once we won the Grey Cup, then of course we went from having no money, no resources to being able to do the kind of things we needed to do.
You're watching Rod Pedersen On Demand. For more of The Rod Pedersen Show, visit rodpedersen.com or follow Rod Pedersen on social media.